For the next hour, you'll be leaving the Show Me state and entering the Show Me the Money state. So stop what you're doing, grab a pen, and get ready to learn. Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group will be your guide for straight talk and honest answers about living the life you deserve in retirement. So prepare to be empowered. Now, here are your Show Me the Money hosts, Randy Floyd, Jake Floyd, and Jeff Shade.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Welcome to Show Me the Money, the radio show that gives you the straight talk and honest answers you need to help you reach your wealth management and retirement goals through smart investing and careful planning. On today's show, we're going to be talking about current events, also 7 ways to reduce taxes on Social Security benefits, also 6 ways to make your portfolio more income focused as you get ready for retirement, and then finally, Floyd Financial Group's 5-step retirement planning process. My name is Jeff Shade, and as always, I'm just here to ask the questions. You know that, but the words of wisdom and solid advice come this morning from Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group. Good morning, Jake. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thanks for asking.
Certainly welcome, my friend. Hope everybody else is having a great weekend. We really appreciate you joining us each and every week right here for Show Me the Money. Well, Jake, it appears to me that, according to the calendar, it's going to be June here in just a day or so, and then in a month, we're going to be halfway through 2025. That's hard to believe. It seems like it should be just March. How do you feel about that?
I read an article the other day that there's some conspiracy theorists out there that think that the world ended in 2020, and that's why time is moving so quickly, is because we're in some kind of a simulation, and this is all happening in our heads. Personally, I don't think that that's the case, but I do think that the older I get, the faster time goes, for sure. And it is always amazing to me that it seems like we just ring in the new year, and here we are at the end of May. And it's been quite a first 150 days or so of Trump's presidency, or 130 or whatever it's been now.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that a little bit. Of course, it's been more than 100 days since Donald Trump took the oath of office. So let's talk a little bit about some of the changes that have occurred here in the first 100 days. One of the things Donald Trump wanted to do, of course, was battle inflation. At this point in time, it's around 2.4%. Do you think that he has made progress on this, and will it indeed go lower?
So the answer is yes. I think he's made a lot of progress on this. Whether it will go lower, whether it needs to go lower, inflation as a whole is another story. Obviously, the Federal Reserve wants to get it down to 2%. 2% is kind of a good goal because you want to have a little bit of a buffer where it's positive, so you don't want to make your target 1%, right? But you don't want to make it 3% either, because then it would be acceptable to be at 3.5 or 4, which is too high. So 2 is kind of this lukewarm inflation number where people generally benefit. I don't know that we're ever going to get back to 2. If we get to 2, we'll probably go negative, meaning we'll start to see deflation. I don't know that it really should be our goal to stick to 2. I can understand why the Federal Reserve wants to remain anchored at 2 or something close to 2. But the massive shift in oil prices alone will definitely keep a lid on inflation. Now, Trump is putting in a lot of very pro-growth policies as well, and those pro-growth policies will likely result in some inflation because growth, to a large extent, creates inflation. And so having that oil price, and for those who have been listening a long time, you'll know that a year ago I was talking about Trump getting oil prices down, because a year ago oil was probably at $90 or so a barrel, and it's now in the low 60s. And I think that that's really hard to overstate the importance of when we're talking about inflation in the long term. And we really have not seen that trickle through as of yet.
So oil prices, that's something we certainly want to keep an eye on. And right now, they do not appear to be too bad. But one of Trump's goals when he first took office was to drill in this country again. Have we seen any progress towards that end goal?
So we have not really seen a lot of green light on drilling. There has been these companies talking about it, but I don't know that there's been a lot of action taken just yet. But it is a big thing to start moving. Once we get it moving, it'll stay moving. And there's been a lot of talk by the Saudis, a lot of talk by Chevron, Exxon, and a lot of these guys about getting more oil flowing. And that talk has brought the price of oil down, even if we really haven't seen necessarily more flow of oil. There's quite a lot of oil out there in reserves that we're already tapped into that we could turn on at a moment's notice. So it'll be interesting to see how new rigs are implemented and drilled and all that kind of thing over the next few months. To my knowledge, there hasn't been a whole lot of that actually happening, but a lot of it's been negotiated.
Another thing that was on Trump's list of things to do, of course, was the trade wars and tariffs. I know that we have had some tariffs. We've had the threat of tariffs. How effective have these threats of tariffs been, do you think, in equalizing things?
I think the threats of tariffs have been incredibly effective so far. Now, the question really I think that we should be asking is how long will they continue to be effective? Meaning, several times now he's implemented tariffs and then paused them immediately. Just last week,
Right.
he had talked about putting a 50% tariff on the EU, and then I think it was on Memorial Day, or maybe it was Tuesday morning, he put that pause on to July 5th or 9th or something like that. So I think at some point, the market may start to feel like Trump is crying wolf more than actually putting these tariffs on. That remains to be seen because the market rallied big on that news. At some point, though, I think we'll become desensitized to the tariff talk and more action will be required in order to move trade and markets the way he wants them to.
Let's switch to the IMF, and you're like me. I mean, when I hear that, I think of the Impossible Mission Force, but I think it's Tom Cruise coming out. But anyway, it's the International Monetary Fund. In April, it slashed its growth forecast for the United States to 1.8% in 2025, down from its 2.7% projection in January. What's your opinion on that? Are we moving in the right direction?
This is where I think United States politics and world politics really separate from each other. And I think a lot of the world is in a mode right now where they are concerned about recession. They're concerned about keeping growth steady, especially as tariff talk ramps up and all that kind of thing. I think the United States is more worried about growing too much over the short term here. Europe is worried about not growing enough. And that's why our Fed and then the IMF and their overall federal bank in Europe and other places are on very different pages. I think the main concern in the short term is a global slowdown for the rest of the world, but also worldwide debt is starting to become an issue where long-dated government treasuries, not just ours, but around the world, Japan, are seeing a lack of demand. People are starting to get a little worried about the bond market. So our 30-year treasury notes couple of weeks ago are really taking off yield-wise. And what the concern is if we are constantly spending every single month $200 billion more than we have to continue to issue treasuries in order to get that money. And so somebody has to buy those treasuries to filter the money through to us so that we can make ends meet every month on our massive behemoth government spending. If we go out to put out to bid $200 billion worth of bonds and people say, I don't think I want those this month, that's kind of a huge problem because that money's already spent, as everybody listening to this well knows. And I think that not only in the U.S., but around the world, they're facing similar problems. And in the short term, we may see some of the Federal Reserves and the global equivalents start to buy up some of this long-term debt to ease concerns about the market, but that's not a long-term solution, right? The long-term solution is to spend less money and make more money. And so I think that's kind of the state of things around the globe right now.
Well, to your comment about bonds and trying to sell bonds, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad, Poor Dad author, is crying wolf a little bit. He says, imagine that you threw a party and nobody showed up. That's what happened with the Fed. The party is over. Hyperinflation is here. The Fed held an auction for U.S. bonds. Nobody showed up. So the Fed quietly bought $50 billion of its own fake money with more fake money. He says hyperinflation is here, millions young and old to be wiped out financially. I think that's maybe going a little bit too far. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's on to the problem potentially. I think that gold going to 25,000, in my opinion, is not a thing. You could see silver go to 70. You can see Bitcoin go to 500,000. I don't know about gold to 25,000, but we'll see. That remains to be seen. Hyperinflation is a word that should not be thrown around lightly because if you are a student of history and you remember in your history books, when you're looking at hyperinflation pictures, you're looking at World War II Germany and wheelbarrows full of money burning to stay warm and that kind of thing. That's a little bit of an exaggeration of the point we're at right now. You can still probably go buy bread at the store and that kind of thing without having a wheelbarrow full of money. Hyperinflation generally is defined by 50% monthly inflation. So we're running about 2.5% inflation. A lot of the world is running less than that. So I don't know that we're at hyperinflation. There's a handful of countries experiencing hyperinflation that have been for a while, and a lot of that's due to long-term abuse of the monetary system and that kind of thing. I do think that his overall sentiment is not incorrect, but his facts and his numbers are blown up, I think, to sell copies of whatever book he has coming out here shortly.
That's right.
But I think, again, his overall picture is maybe not too far off, but I don't think we're quite to that extreme yet.
Yeah, you were talking about World War II and post-World War II Germany. It reminds me of the story, I don't know if it was true or not, but a man put all this money, a wheelbarrow full of money, to go to the market to buy something like bread or something like that, and he left his wheelbarrow full of money outside the door. When he came back, his wheelbarrow was gone, but all the money was there. Somebody dumped out all the money just to steal the wheelbarrow because it was worth more than the money was. I know that's a true story, but I always remembered that. Let's talk a little bit about Trump and Putin. I understand that the relationship, or at least it appears, is souring a little bit between those two gentlemen there because Russia just does not want to abide by this ceasefire suggestion that Trump has put out there.
Yeah, I think that Trump is finding it more difficult to get Putin to acquiesce his request than he had originally thought it would be. And granted, I think he's having a little more trouble than probably a lot of the people listening to this show thought he might. That being said, Putin is definitely a type A, old world autocrat leader, right? And he's not going to be told what to do by some guy on the other side of the world. So in order to have a peace talk with Russia, which I do think is probably closer than it seems right now, I think that you need to deal with Russia the way you need to deal with Russia, which is not big, bold, scary language from the other side of the world. No. I think he needs to go over there and talk to him. And Russia cares very much about saving face. I think that's one of the big things that he and President Xi in China have in common. The public perception is almost more important than anything else to them. And so if we're over here saying, hey, we're going to settle this in 24 hours. And again, on this show, I said I thought he would settle it pretty quick. So I'll be the first to admit that I have been wrong to this point. I think if you get Trump over there talking to him, I think it'll probably find an end relatively quickly, but we'll just have to see. I think that will be good for 5 or 10 percentage points in the market if and when it does get settled. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. I know clients are looking forward to it. But yeah, I think Putin has proven to be a little bit tougher nut to crack than a lot of people were thinking.
Yeah, and Trump says, listen, if you don't listen to me, I'm going to impose sanctions on you. And I'm wondering, well, what is he going to do? Just say, we're going to stop buying your vodka, or we're going to stop buying those furry round Russian hats? I mean, how many furry round Russian hats do you really need, or those little stacking dolls? What will we be getting from Russia?
So I think it's less about what we're getting, and I think it'll be more like, hey, if you do business with Russia, if you buy things from Russia, then you don't do business with us. Right. And he will strangle the money out of them. And one of the things that Trump did very well in his first term was really strangle the money out of all the people who were our enemies. Iran was basically broke, and Democrats and terrorists have one thing in common: they need other people's money to operate. I
like your honesty there, Jay. Come on. Pretty funny.
And I think that I don't know if that's over the line or not, but we're going with it.
No, we're going with it. There you go.
I think that terrorism is a very expensive endeavor, and guess what? You're not doing while you're doing terrorism. You're not working. If you strangle the money out of these places, most of it comes from illicit sources like drug deals and human trafficking and all that kind of thing. If you get rid of that, they can't buy missiles. They can't buy bombs. They can't buy the materials necessary to build IEDs and things like that. And so I think he would look to do the same thing to Russia that he did to Iran the last time out.
Talking with Jake Floyd, Floyd Financial Group. Again, if our conversation resonates with you, you want to get in and sit down with Jake and talk about world events and how they may affect you and your journey towards a confident retirement. We are offering this weekend our Show Me the Money financial review for you at no cost, no obligation. To get yours, call 417-889-7233. 417-889-7233. As I said, no cost, no obligation. Certainly no judgment. We'll meet you where you are. And we talk about these things on the radio every week because they could have possibly an effect on your portfolio. So if you want to talk to Jake about that, again, 417-889-7233. You can also find out more about us online at floydfinancialgroup.com. Jake, let's take a break. When we come back here on Show Me the Money, we're going to be talking about 7 ways to reduce taxes on Social Security benefits in 2025 and more when our program continues here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
Ready for another helping of some more real money talk? Thought so. Now, here's another serving of Show Me the Money with your hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd. In this segment, we're going to be talking about ways to reduce taxes on Social Security benefits in 2025.
And Jake, President Ronald Reagan implemented taxes on Social Security back in about 1984. And if I recall, he said, well, this is just going to be temporary, but it never did go away. And here we are today in 2025, still paying taxes on Social Security. I don't know about you. How do you feel about that, Jake? It seems like we kind of paid taxes on this stuff already, and now we're going to be paying taxes again. Is it really fair that we're taxed on Social Security again? Do you think that really Social Security tax is ever going to go away?
Well, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary tax from the government.
And I know.
I think that, because I think it was supposed to be temporary when we first implemented national income tax as well. But here we are, and we've gone from being one of the lesser tax nations out there to one of the most taxed nations. In fact, if you look at us versus a lot of other countries, the UK pays more than us and Canada pays more than us, but there's a lot of countries that pay less than us. The UAE pays $0 in federal income tax. You don't even have to file a tax return over there.
Wow.
So I don't know if the sheikhs over there are just gifting the money to the government or where all the money's coming from. I think there's always going to be some tax, right? But we don't need to keep adding and adding and adding to tax, especially to have these bloated government programs that really don't do anybody any good. So back to the question you asked, I think that the overarching theme here of all these different ways to reduce taxes on Social Security really probably needs to be prefaced with Representative Massey introduced legislation a couple of weeks ago to eliminate taxes on Social Security at the federal level. And that was one of Trump's major campaign promises, but I do think it's probably a coin flip at this point. I think there's a pretty good chance that that could happen, and that would obviously go a long way to reducing taxes on Social Security benefits in 2025, as our topic discusses here. So I would just say, we'll keep an eye on that. But assuming that does not happen, there's quite a few ways here to try to reduce taxes on Social Security. And when we're thinking about taxes on Social Security, sometimes if you're filing Social Security at 62, there's other considerations like if you're on Obamacare, if you retire early, we need to be careful with how much income you have. That's kind of a tax as far as paying too much for health insurance and all that kind of thing. The first one here says delay Social Security until 70. Anybody that knows me and has listened to this show for a while probably knows that I'm not a big fan of delaying Social Security. And a lot of the reason for that is nobody's guaranteed tomorrow. And I would rather spend the government's money now and save your money for later and for you to have more options than I would the other way around. And while I guess no tax on Social Security if you're not taking it, right?
Yeah, right.
So I'm not sure that that's a win as far as the grand scheme of things. What I would say is if you're retired and you're going to stay retired, it probably makes sense to look at turning on Social Security. Now, that's something that we talk about a lot in here. There's a handful of reasons to leave it until 70, but those reasons are fairly few and far between for most people. So I don't know that just not taking income means less tax. I mean, I guess it does, but I don't know if that's a strategy. What I would rather do is maximize your net income or net well-being, including the taxes. I'd rather have a whole bunch of money and pay taxes than have no money and pay no taxes.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to get out of paying taxes is just don't make any money, but I don't think that's a great alternative. Let's talk about the tax rate, though. 85% of your Social Security could be taxed if you make a certain amount of money, but it isn't 85% across the board for everybody. Can you talk a little bit about the graduations as to how much and the percentage of tax that you'll pay depending upon how much you make with Social Security?
Yeah, Jeff. So basically, there's a 0% tax bracket, a 50% tax bracket, and 85% tax bracket. Now, like you said, Jeff, I think that it's important to realize that if 50% of your Social Security is taxable, that does not mean we're paying 50% of it in taxes. It just means only 50% of your Social Security figures into your income. And so the threshold for that is $34,000 if you're single and $44,000 if you're filing jointly. And then above that, you will go to 85% taxable. It never gets to 100% taxable. It's just 0, 50, or 85. If you make less than $25,000 as a single or $32,000 filing jointly, then you don't pay any taxes on it. And that's largely due to your standard deduction and all that kind of thing. But basically, there's a sliding scale there. And so if we're careful, depending on what kind of income you have, if you have Roth IRAs or Roth 401k money, we can use that to kind of artificially keep your income lower to make you pay less in taxes. This is all stuff that we look at while we're planning to try to make the best tax sense of your situation.
And again, I want to point out the fact that we're talking about federal taxation on Social Security. As I recall, Jake, most states do not tax Social Security. There's not a state tax on Social Security. The state of Missouri, is there?
No, that went away actually last year. It is now exempt from state tax.
So some of the ways that you can save on taxation with Social Security, number one, is to delay taking Social Security until age 70. You don't make any money. You don't pay taxes on that. The second one you sort of alluded to there a little bit, and that's leverage Roth account rules. Can you expand on that just a little bit more?
Yeah, so let's say I have normal Social Security income of $30,000 for a couple. And then we have some Roth IRA money. If we use Roth IRA money to round out the rest of our income, let's say we take another $20,000 off of Roth, that Roth money does not factor into your taxable income. And so you would still be below the threshold for the joint filing and you wouldn't pay any taxes. We can do that also for the higher bracket, where if we're in danger of getting into the 85% bracket, if we use Roth money to kind of keep us from going too high, then maybe we're only taxed at 50%. So there's a lot of different ways that we could use that. When people have Roth IRA money, I always say that's really good flexible money to have sitting around. It really keeps your options open. I don't know that everybody and their brother should just go out and try to convert to Roth or save into a Roth, but if you have that Roth money, it can help you, especially in those first few years of retirement when we're looking at potentially using Obamacare if we retire before Medicare age and things like that. That income also does not factor into adding up how much income you have coming in. That's also nice.
So what we're looking to do is to lower our adjusted gross income in a number of different ways. One way that you can do that is called tax loss harvesting, where you offset capital gains with taxes. Can you give me an example of how that would work?
Yeah, Jeff. So if we have capital gains in a given year that are going to push us up over that threshold, if we have something in our portfolio that has lost money, we can go in and sell that in the same year to offset the gain and make it so that our overall income is not as high. So in doing that, that can really help us to not show as much taxable income on our tax return and therefore not have us kicked into the next bracket potentially for Social Security tax.
We're talking about ways to reduce taxes on Social Security with Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group. Our telephone number 417-889-7233 if you'd like to get in and talk to Jake about this subject. Next one I want to talk about is making qualified charitable distributions. How does that help us reduce taxes on Social Security?
Yeah, so once you get to RMD age, which for most people that are not there yet is 73 years old now, instead of taking your required minimum distribution where the government forces us to take money out each year so they can get their tax money, if you send that money directly to a charity using something called a qualified charitable distribution or QCD, that money never shows up that you took it out from a tax perspective. It's perfectly legal. This is a strategy that we can use, but if you take a QCD, there's two main benefits. Number one, it doesn't factor into your income, but it also allows you to take that deduction, if you will, air quotes, while you're still taking your standard deduction on your taxes, meaning you get $31,000 or so standard deduction as a married couple. In order to itemize your taxes, you need to have more than $31,000 worth of deductions. But in this is one of the rare exceptions where you can take your deduction and you can do the QCD together instead of having to have a whole bunch of other farm expense or whatever it might be to equal that $31,000. So QCDs are really good, especially if you're planning on giving money anyway to the church, if you're tithing and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
If we simply shift where that money is coming from, once you get to RMD age, that can be really powerful.
And as I said, Missouri does not tax Social Security benefits on a state level. Most states do not, but I can tell you this, do not move to Colorado, Connecticut, Minnesota, Montana, New Mexico, Rhode Island, Utah, Vermont, or West Virginia, because those states do tax Social Security on a state level. And I'm not going to hold my breath until Social Security is not taxed, because I think that is just, I don't know, if that happened, Jake, I think that everybody on Social Security would be dancing in the streets. So anyway, I hope that it happens, but I'm not holding out hope that it's going to happen anytime soon. Talking with Jake Floyd, Floyd Financial Group. We're talking about taxation on Social Security in general. Again, if you've got questions about our topics today, call us here at 417-889-7233. Request your Floyd Financial Group retirement review. There's no cost and there is no obligation for this and no judgment. We'll meet you where you are. As I said, 417-889-7233 is the number. Call that, leave your name, telephone number. Ashley will call you back during the week and set up that conversation. We would love to hear from you. Jake, we're going to take a break here on Show Me the Money. When we come back, we're going to be talking about ways to make your portfolio more income focused as you get ready for retirement and more when our show continues on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
We're back with your financial catch of the day, and it's a big one. Here's more Show Me the Money Radio with your hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd. In this segment, we're going to be talking about ways to make my portfolio more income focused as I get ready for retirement.
And Jake, as you approach retirement, shifting your portfolio to focus more on income can help provide stability and support your lifestyle without relying heavily on selling assets. So let's talk about some effective ways to make your portfolio more income-focused. The first one is to increase allocations to dividend-paying stocks. Are there really dividend-paying stocks out there, Jake, that can make a real difference in your income?
There are, Jeff. I think there's generally a fairly large philosophical gap between people who really like dividend stocks and people who like growth stocks. And so I would argue that there's a place for both of these in a portfolio, but when we're looking at dividend stocks, think about companies that provide basic materials. Oil companies tend to pay pretty good dividends, healthcare stocks, financial stocks, so banks, insurance companies, those types of companies. I think that there's a lot of things to be said for dividend stocks. They tend to be a little bit safer and they tend to hold up a little bit better in poor markets. That being said, they tend to get left behind in times of big growth. And the age-old question is, do I want a stock that pays a 5% dividend, or do I want a growth stock that's going up 10 or 15% a year, and I'll just sell a little bit of it to create my income? And that's a little bit of a personal preference, but dividend-paying stocks are definitely a way to increase income into your portfolio for either your use or for safety purposes.
What about bonds and bond funds? Would that be a way to create income in retirement?
Yeah, so bonds and bond funds are kind of like the next step beyond dividend-paying stocks. So you get more safety. Generally speaking, on a well-diversified bond portfolio, you're going to have a little bit more income than you are on a dividend portfolio. And so this is definitely another way to diversify under the same premise of the dividend-paying stocks is to have, you want to be diversified in quality of bonds. So lesser quality bonds pay more income, but you also want to be diversified among length of bonds, so how long the term is, right? So we don't want all just 3 months or 30 years. We want to have a good blend there because there's different characteristics that those bonds take on. But that is definitely a strategy for increasing income.
And bond ETFs, mutual funds, those are for diversified exposure. Let's continue here to talk about ways to create income in retirement. A portfolio that is more income focused, of course. Growth is one thing, but you got to have money to spend. And the income part of it is really, really ultra important in this conversation. What about income focused mutual funds or ETFs? How do you feel about those?
Those are just simply the first two we just talked about, but packaged together.
Right.
So maybe you have 30 or 40 dividend paying stocks together in an ETF, or maybe some of the bond fund ETFs have like 10,000 positions in them or something like that. So that's a good way to get diversification of assets, but we want to make sure that we understand what we own in there, because some people are like, well, I have bonds. Do I have muni bonds, or do I have long-term treasuries, or do I have short-term corporates, or do I have high-yielding 5-year debt on, let's say, a company like Ford, right? There's tons and tons and tons of bonds out there. A lot of people don't realize that the bond market is actually much larger than the stock market. There's a time and a place for bonds. Bonds are a little bit interesting right here because they look better than they've looked in a long time. But at the same time, we're in a situation where interest rates may continue to rise in the short term, which hurts bonds. So we want to be a little bit careful, especially depending on the duration and the quality of those bonds. These are all things that we help hold clients' hands through as we get near and into retirement. This is kind of the bread and butter. What we do is try to make sure we create an asset allocation for you that works in all types of financial weather. We don't want to just be only growth. We don't want to be just only dividend paying stocks or just only bond funds, right? We want to have a good mix, and we want to make sure that we have the goal in mind. So we need to understand, and we'll talk about this in the next segment a little bit. We need to get to know you, get to understand what's important to you before we can recommend any specific product.
Ways to make your portfolio more income focused as you get ready for retirement. That's what we're talking about with Jake Floyd here, Floyd Financial Group. If you're just joining us, we've talked about dividend paying stocks, adding bonds and bond funds, and income focused mutual funds or ETFs. Let's talk a little bit about real estate here, or real estate trusts, REITs. How do you feel about getting into those to try to create some income?
Yeah, so Jeff, I think for longtime listeners here, they probably know how I feel about REITs. I think the base investment in a REIT, where we pool money together and we buy, let's say, or build an apartment complex or an office building, and then we lease that out, and then the people make the money off of it, that overall structure is not bad. The problem with REITs a lot of the time is that they don't net a very good return to the investor at the end of the day. Now, I'm not saying all REITs are bad and that no REITs make sense, but a lot of the not publicly traded REITs, they have a lot of expense inside there. You basically have too many people getting paid with your money. So you have to have the agent who sells it to you. His investment company has to get paid. He gets paid. Then, the property manager gets paid. If you're building a property, all the construction people get paid. Then you have an ongoing property manager. You got to mow the lawn. All these people get paid. And so a gross return of maybe 12% or something gets netted down to maybe 6 to you. And then we're dependent on what the market's like when they go to exit. So REITs are kind of a complicated instrument, so I don't want to spend too much time on them. But in general, REITs do kick off a pretty good distribution each month. They can be incorporated in there, but generally it's not suitable to have more than about 10% of your overall portfolio in a REIT because they're highly illiquid, most of them, unless they're publicly traded.
So we're not really big fans of REITs here at Floyd Financial Group. And when you talk about real estate, certainly actively managed real estate, I mean, that is something that is not for the faint of heart here. I would not suggest getting into that when you get into retirement to create income, because if you're involved in active real estate, it's really like having another job.
Yeah, Jeff, and I think that it's one thing if you've owned a rental property your whole life and you've got 10 or 15 rental properties or even 3 or 4. And when something breaks, you go over there and fix it, and you know your tenants and all that kind of thing. That's great. If you've done that before, no problem. Even if you have a company managing them for you and you understand the game, that's still fine. What I would suggest is if you've never been a landlord before, starting at age 65 when you retire might not be the greatest idea, just because it can be a very challenging investment to hold, and there's a lot of risk there, and it's probably not a good idea. Something that people want to do in retirement is not to go learn a bunch of new tricks and try to figure things out that are frustrating. So if you've been doing rentals for a long time, there's absolutely nothing wrong with real estate. Real estate has great return in general. So I'm not knocking real estate. I'm just saying that, if you haven't been a landlord before, your quieter days post-retirement may not be the time that you want to start biting that off.
Right. If I'm 65, 66, 67, the last thing I want to do at 8 o'clock at night is go over and unclog somebody's toilet of some rental property that I own. So again, active real estate, that's another game completely, but it is a game, I think, for a younger person. 417-889-7233 is our telephone number. We are talking about ways to generate income in retirement. Next one is the big one that I think about all the time, Jake. It's annuities for guaranteed income. Can you expand on how that may create income in retirement, who that's right for?
Yeah, annuities are definitely not something for everybody. However, in today's interest rate environment, annuities are fairly attractive. Annuities can be used to generate lifetime income, either through an income rider or through annuitization. There are quite a few benefits to annuities. One of the big benefits, in my opinion, is that they're offered through insurance companies. And insurance companies are financially very strong companies. And so if you really want someplace safe to put your money, I think the argument could be made that an annuity at an insurance company that's been around a long time with a good track record could be one of the safest places on earth to put your money. Guaranteed income. All pensions pretty much are funded with annuities, ultimately. And so think of having your own annuity and getting income from it, kind of like having a personal pension, right? Where you can put money in there and it'll kick out a certain amount of money to you over your lifetime or over a certain period of time. There are more hybrid type annuities where maybe we don't want the guaranteed income, but we want a good rate of return and we want to have our money safe. That can also be a good place for annuities.
And you mentioned the word safety there. I think that a lot of people, that piques their interest when they get into retirement, is a safe way to create income. Of course, every investment's going to have some risk to it. But when I think of safety, I think of things like money market accounts or CDs. I hear the term high yield savings account. Seems like an oxymoron to me. Are there really any high yield savings accounts anymore?
Savings accounts right now, I think the highest ones you're going to find out there are around 4%. So that's a little bit in the eye of the beholder, right, whether or not that's a lot. Your local bank will probably not offer you anywhere near that, but there are some things through like Capital One or other banks, investment banks out there that are offering some things. As far as annuities definitely are, assuming we're with a good carrier, safe. And in today's world, with interest rates where they are, they can really be a great growth tool. The big thing with annuities is you need to understand the liquidity implications of the annuities. Make sure you understand when and how you can access money out of there, because a lot of annuities are less liquid than other investments you might be used to.
So with a money market account or a traditional savings account, of course, liquidity is the big pro there. Let's talk about CDs a little bit for producing income in retirement. I would think a good strategy, and correct me if I'm wrong, would be to ladder those CDs. Can you talk about that and what laddering is?
Yeah, so laddering, it has a couple of purposes. Number one, if you have CDs of different lengths, you're kind of diversifying away your interest rate risk, where maybe when one CD comes up, interest rates are lower, and then, later, if a year later when they come up, they're higher again. If you have them laddered over different periods of time, then you're a little bit less susceptible to interest rates fluctuating a lot on you and having a lot of fluctuation in your income. Laddering also can be good for timed liquidity. And I think that, let's say you need 1 year's income, so you have that money in one CD, and then next year's income you have in a different CD, and then you can kind of keep rolling those out. So that's another purpose for those.
We're talking with Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group. We're talking about ways to generate income in retirement. Again, if you'd like to talk to Jake about this subject, you can get in and get your Floyd Financial Group retirement review at no cost and no obligation whatsoever. That telephone number, 417-889-7233. No cost, no obligation, no judgment. We'll meet you where you are. So make that call today, 417-889-7233. You can also find out more about us online at floydfinancialgroup.com. Jake, time for a break. When we come back here on Show Me the Money, we're going to be talking about the Floyd Financial Group 5-step retirement planning process. And our program continues here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
People of the Ozarks, step away from the fishing pole and prepare to be shown the money, because we're back with more straight talk and honest answers with Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. In this segment, we're going to be talking about what it looks like when you come to Floyd Financial Group for your initial client consultation.
That's right, Jake. And 417-889-7233 is the number that we put out every week to invite people to come in and sit down and talk with us. A lot of people don't know what happens when they come in with this consultation. They think, oh my gosh, it's going to be a hard sell type of thing. I can't get out of there like a timeshare. Could not be further from the truth, Jake. I wanted to demystify this process a little bit. So let's talk about when someone calls that number, makes that appointment, comes in and sits down and talks with you. First of all, it is a casual conversation. It's a no-tie zone, as your dad always says, right?
Right, yeah. The first step is what we call discovery, but basically we just get to know each other. And I think a lot of people think that we're really focused on money, which we are. Obviously, that's our business. However, understanding somebody really comes down to quite a lot more than their finances. Understanding what's important to you, if you have kids or if you don't have kids, who you want to have your stuff when you're no longer here. Understanding how you see yourself spending time in retirement. If you get to 65 or 62 or whatever, and you've been working 40, 50, 60, 100 hours a week, some people, for your whole career, and now you all of a sudden have all this time. What are you going to do with that time? How are you going to spend that time? And a lot of those factors go into the plan ultimately to make sure that we have enough money to live on, enough money to do what you want to do. The analogy I use a lot is, a lot of people like to fish in retirement. Do you like to fish off the bank? Or do you need a $80,000 pickup pulling a $100,000 bass boat to make your fishing dreams come true? And I say that in jest, but some people do.
Yeah.
And understanding how you see retirement going is really the building blocks for the overall plan. So I ask a lot of questions in that first meeting, trying to understand you and what's important to you. Yes, the finances too, but I would say probably only half the conversation is about finance. A lot of the conversation is about these other things that ultimately factor into the financial aspect of things. But understanding who you are and what's important to you is the main purpose of that first meeting.
Right, and we call that lifestyle planning. As you said, it's finding out who you are, what motivates you, what you're really looking for in retirement, because everybody's not looking for the same thing. As you said, some people need the ultra high-end bass boat. Myself, jump into the old 72 Ford F100 with a Zebco reel and drive 10 minutes to the lake, and I'm just fine with that, but everybody is not the same. So the first thing we do is we sit down and we discover you, and you can discover us as well, too, to see whether or not we're a good fit. So once we've determined that, okay, I think this might work, what's the next step?
Yeah, so the next step is I kind of go back to the drawing board and I say, okay, here is this lovely person or couple, and here's what's important to them. Here's how much they have saved. Here's how much their Social Security is going to be, pension income if they have it. All right, how much money do we need to take out of their portfolio each month to kind of get them to where they're comfortable in retirement? Do we have more than we need? If so, then how do we grow the rest of those assets? Otherwise, how do we use the income to live off of and just try to maximize things in general? How much inflation do we need to figure in for future income payments, things like that? And I kind of go through that and say, okay, here's all the financial tools that we could possibly use in the world. And here's the ones that would make sense for this person in this current position. And I kind of go through and create a plan. And that's my kind of step two, is that happens in between the first meeting and the second meeting, where I go through and kind of create the plan. And then when we get back together, I kind of present that to you. When we get back together, though, that is not going to be decision time by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, some people want to try to make a decision at that meeting. I usually try to push that off to give you time to think about it and pray about it if that's something you do. We're not in a big hurry. We want to make sure we make good decisions. And I understand sometimes you have things that are, kind of under the gun where you get a pension packet you have to turn in 30 days or something. We'll accommodate for all that, but I don't ever want you to feel pushed in any way when you come in. And I want to make sure we have a good understanding of the plan before we decide to implement it.
So our retirement process consists of multiple meetings. It's not just one. So what you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, Jake, is that in the first meeting, this is simply discovery, learning who you are and what your goals are. Then you do this analysis. Now, do you do the analysis without people there? That's between the first and the second meeting. So you've got this second meeting that people come back in for. What is involved with the second meeting before we get to the third?
Yeah, so in the second meeting, I kind of lay out what I think the best thing to do is. And then I also leave some time in that meeting for you to ask questions as we go along. I've heard that some people go to financial planners and they won't let them interrupt when they're talking through the plan, that the guy is too fragile and he gets off track if you interrupt him. I want you to interrupt me. If we're talking through things and something doesn't make sense, I want you to tell me that, so that we have a good understanding. And again, it's just a conversation. It's not super formal. We're just going to have a discussion, and I'll show you kind of how many buckets of money we're going to set up, where we're going to take income from, how much income we're going to take, when that income is going to show up like a paycheck in your bank account for you, so that you can get to and through retirement. Now, some people I realize don't need income, but the vast majority of people do need income in retirement off their money, and all those types of details. And then once I've laid all that out, generally what we do is we schedule time for one more meeting, and that gives you a chance to develop questions. Like I said, think about it, pray about it. And then usually that third meeting is, if it makes sense at that point after I've answered questions, then we might look at moving forward. I've had people that take 4 or 5 or 6 meetings, and that's okay. We're not in, like I said, I'm not in any hurry, and I want to make sure you understand it. We're only planning the rest of your life here, you know. So I mean, it's very important, and I don't want anybody to ever feel rushed. And then if we decide to move forward and implement things, then the last step is we set up reviews. Usually in the beginning, we set up a 90-day review process. So every 90 days, we get together for the first little bit to make sure that you understand what's happening. And if you have questions, it gives you a forum to ask them. You can call me at any time, obviously. That forum where we're sitting across from each other, I can really explain things if anything's confusing to you. And then at some point, we may lengthen that to 6 months or a year, depending on your situation. Or we may just stay at the 90-day review process ongoingly. That's fine. Some people eventually get to the point, though, where they're like, you know, Jake, it's working out roughly like you said it would, and I don't want to spend my whole retirement in your office. And so I understand that too, but I need to see everybody at least once a year just to make sure we know what's going on with them, make sure there's no beneficiary changes, any changes we need for taxes or income. That's one thing that I'm talking about a lot right now, and Trump's tax plan is coming out, so that's going to be something over the next few months that's going to be warranting a lot of conversation as far as, do we need to change tax withholding? Do we need to change where we're taking income from? All those types of things. So that review process doesn't really ever stop. We just keep reviewing ongoingly after that. So it's not like we're going to set you up and say, hey, okay, great, have a nice life. This is going to be something that I'm in with you, and I'm here for you ongoingly.
Talking about Floyd Financial Group's 5-step retirement review with Jake Floyd, and we have talked about the discovery process. That's primarily in the first meeting. Then the analysis of what you have. Then comes the planning part of it, implementation, and finally the review. And again, the review is up to you. If you want to be reviewed every 90 days, that's fine. But some people go a year or so. But we do keep in touch with you here at Floyd Financial Group. You know, as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking to myself, Jake, that's a lot of work that you guys do. A lot of work. We really don't charge anything for this consultation at all, do we?
No. I find that it makes for less good conversation if I'm charging hourly or something like that.
Yeah.
I would rather us just take our time. And sometimes we don't come to an agreement on things, and maybe you disagree with my side of things. The best thing for me to do is just to give you a little advice on the top, and then you just kind of keep doing what you're doing. There's a lot of different situations out there, so I don't want to blanket it, but I would just say that my goal is to add value to every single person that walks in my door. And if I do that, I know that God will take care of the rest. And so far, he's been very, very good to me. I'm very blessed. So don't feel bad for me for not charging for meetings. Some people are like, oh, but I have to pay you for this time you put in. No, just allow me to add value to your situation. That's all that I ask.
And Jake, a lot of people may be listening to the program every week, and they're hearing us talk about these big numbers, and they say to themselves, well, I don't really have enough to deal with Floyd Financial Group. We always say we'll meet you where you are. What does that mean, Jake? I mean, when we say there are no minimums at Floyd Financial Group.
Yeah, so I do not set minimums as far as how much money you have to come see me or come work with me. Now, there are some situations where it may not make sense for you to invest here. Like if you're just getting started and you're 25 and you got a 401k plan at work, it may make more sense to invest in that 401k and get your match and all that kind of thing. But if there's something that I can help on, I definitely will. And even in those situations where you have 401k at work, a lot of times what I'll do is weigh in on your investments there and say, okay, here's how you're set up now. I think if we move things to this other fund, that might be better off long term. And obviously, if I give you good advice over time, that will help increase your return over there. And then if you change jobs at some point, maybe I can help out at that point. I'm not a big fan of keeping score. If I invest money for people, I get paid. I don't want people to think I work for nothing. That's not true. But at the same time, I'm not just looking for every excuse to get paid that I possibly can. And so if you come in here and you're just getting started, I do like working with younger people too, because I can really add value to them. I can help you understand to the extent you want to what you're investing in and how it's working for you.
So, Jake, for those people who are interested in coming in and seeing us here at Floyd Financial Group, once again, I'll repeat the number. It's 417-889-7233. Now, you can call that number during the week if you want and talk to Ashley, but you can call it this weekend if you want as well. Leave your name, telephone number, very simple, very quick, probably less than a minute to do that. Ashley will call you back during the week and set up a time for you to come in and sit down and talk with Jake here at Floyd Financial Group, Randy, when he is in the office. And again, absolutely no cost for this conversation. No judgment. We'll meet you where you are. No obligation either. So if you want to get on the path to a confident retirement, you want to have a conversation with someone who really understands you and what your needs, your goals, and your dreams are, give us a call here at Floyd Financial Group. We'd love to help you. 417-889-7233. You can also find out more about our firm online at floydfinancialgroup.com. Jake, out of time for this week. Thank you so much for taking time out of your week to talk to us here in the radio. I also want to thank our fine listeners here for joining us in the last bastion of sanity, Springfield, Missouri. So for Jake Floyd, I'm Jeff Shade, wishing you a great weekend. We'll talk to you again next week right here with another edition of Show Me the Money on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
The information provided in the preceding program is for educational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representations as to its completeness or accuracy. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Financial planning is offered through Floyd Financial Group, LLC, an SEC registered investment